BeTheTalk, episode 242, featuring Adi Jaffe. Welcome to BeTheTalk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Adi Jaffe. Adi, are you ready to talk?
I'm more than ready to talk. I've been ready to talk for a month, Nathan. How you doing?
I am doing great. Adi Jaffe is an addiction specialist, and we can find out more about his various enterprises over at adijaffe.com. ADIJAFFE.com. Adi, welcome to the talk.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
So your TEDx UCLA talk is called Rebranding Our Shame, and what a story you have. My gosh, a motorcycle accident, you're coming to, and then you realize you're actually handcuffed, and the doctor you thought was a doctor was actually a police officer. Please take us behind the talk.
Yeah. So, that was my first TEDx talk, and the first time I told my story publicly. And you know what, the entire idea behind the talk is to get people to really pay attention and notice to our overuse of labels and our over-reliance on labels to describe other people and understand them. And so what I did in my talk essentially is walk people through this story where they really kind of felt bad for me as the story progressed. I got in a motorcycle accident, all true story, obviously broke my leg, cracked my shin, essentially laid on the ground in severe pain, taken to the hospital. And I just left out one small detail as I was starting to tell that story. And that was the fact that what I was doing on that motorcycle was I was delivering drugs, because at that time in my life, I was a drug dealer. And so, I really tried to push for people the point that, if I would have started out that way, if I would have started out the talk and by saying, hey, I was a drug dealer in LA and I got into a motorcycle accident and the cops arrested me when I was in the hospital, nobody would have felt bad for me. Nobody would have seen the story in the same way as me being a professor at UCLA telling this sad story of my injury and pain. And then I carry out the entire rest of the talk to explain to people that those expectations you develop about individuals based on their labels, their race, their political affiliation, their intelligence, their mental health capacity, being an addict or suffering with ADHD or things of that nature, have been shown to completely alter not just their behavior, but their outcomes, their potential for success, and your perception, your ability to perceive that success. And so essentially the point I make in that talk is not only there are dual responsibilities. There is a responsibility on society to recognize just how imprecise these labels are that we try to throw around, and for us to understand that our views of other people are so heavily dictated by these labels. And also for people, the reason it's called Rebranding Our Shame is for people to take ownership of their own quote unquote brand, and to understand that, if you walk around and say, my name is Adi and I'm an addict, or you walk around and you say, I have ADHD, or I have depression, part of what you're doing is you're projecting a very specific view of yourself to other people. And then what we need to do is get better at allowing more nuance into that brand that we create.
Well, what I loved about the opener, I think it would be a kind of an organizer's dream, because you actually lead the audience because of the way you skillfully set up your story. I want to say a cathartic effect, but it's almost the reverse of that. I mean, catharsis usually is this wonderful attractional thing, and you do kind of a sneaky little kind of gotcha piece where all of a sudden you're leading us in, we're feeling such compassion, and then we're like, oh, he shouldn't have been doing that. Exactly. And then the wall goes up, and then you're like, gotcha, that's called shame. And this is, we all have it. 75% of people wrestling with it from the notes I took on your talk. And then you lead us through branding and stories, and the fact that we're all locked up in our stories, and we have to open that, get the key, unlock that, and become a better version of us by leaving that old brand behind. Powerful.
Yeah, it was fun. It was fun to watch because as I'm giving the talk, and there's 1,000 people. That UCLA's TEDx talk is pretty big, so there's about 1,000 people, and you only get to really see the first couple of rows as you're standing there speaking because the lights are glaring, and you're standing in that red circle. And as I'm talking, you hear the little, people responding to the accident. And I talk about my mom who was there in the audience. She flew in from Israel to come see the talk, and I talk about her. So everybody, I've got everybody to buy into me being the good, Jewish nice guy who got in a bad motorcycle accident. His mom was mad at him. And then when I say that there was, about a half a pound of coke on me when I'd gotten in the accident, you hear this. I think you can still hear it on the talk. People just go, like, it's just kind of the air comes out of their lungs because all of a sudden I'm not the guy that I was 3 minutes earlier. And, I deal with that all the time with people. I still help people with addiction to this day. That's what I do for a living. I help people with mental health, shame, and addiction issues, whether they are, C-level executives at corporations or, children of alcoholics who are struggling with just making school and being able to graduate. So what I notice over and over is people get so bought in to these stories of who they are based on these labels. And I still love, the talk's been watched by about 500,000 people. And I love that it's had that impact.
We've been enjoying this talk with Adi Jaffe, and as he said, he is helping people break free of the old story and the addictions, all of these things. We're going to talk more with Adi over in the Blitz Round. People ask, how could I start a 7-day-a-week podcast? It's because of what I've learned from my mentors. Some of the best mentors in history aren't around anymore. They've left hours of one-on-one mentoring behind in their books. Each month at Classics on Tap, I record a new chapter from a classic business book to help you make a difference. Download your first chapter at classicsontap.com. And we're back with Adi Jaffe. It is time for the Blitz Round. I am going to ask Adi a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and performance of his recent TEDx UCLA talk. Adi, are you ready?
I am.
Were you invited to speak or did you apply?
One of my students in class actually nominated me to speak.
So are you a memorizer, improviser, or a blender?
For that talk, I was a memorizer. I must have given that talk to friends and family definitely upwards of 60 times, maybe close to 100 times.
Wow. And so did that serve you? I mean, the memorization, that's not your natural thing. The format sometimes demands it or something close to that. How did that work for you?
It worked okay because it was my first time. It was harder. I've given another TEDx since, and I knew better that time that if I miss a point, it's not that big a deal. And as long as I get the gist. But that first time I was really trying to stick hard to it. I was one of those guys that you always see people holding a card or, Johan Hari in one of his 7 million listen talk actually wrote everything on his hands. So I had one of those cards and there's about 1 or 2 points in the middle. And all it had was an outline, just the first sentence of every paragraph was written on that card in case I needed a prompt. All
right. So writing on not every place can you use a card, but it's a great little cue for keynotes or anything else that you're doing outside of a branded talk. What's another tip, tool, or technique that helps you?
Great question. So I use the PowerPoint. Not everybody uses a PowerPoint. I use it for the cadence. I use it to really cue me along the lines of where I want to take the talk. But I also really make sure to not put almost any text, really. I mean, if there's any text, it's a single phrase, maybe. But, a picture or something along the lines that conveys the point that I'm trying to make. It helps the audience sometimes, I think, in terms of having the visual impact, but it also helps me identify important points in the talk that I need to get to.
Talk Universe, I love that tip. Using only one word or one very short phrase per slide, particularly if you have images or things like that trigger what you want to be saying. That's a great tip as well. This is cut for time question. What was the most painful part that you had to cut out of the talk?
Oh, that's such a good question. I think for a lot of us academics who do this, there's so much more information we want to share because we feel like in academia, you get taught that if you don't put the whole picture forward, you're kind of lying to your audience. And that's not what a TED Talk is. A TED Talk is about getting people engaged in a topic in a way that piques their interest. And I have to keep that honestly, my first talk, I think I got 12 minutes. I got a 12-minute spot, and I think my first talk was 20 minutes when I timed it. And so there was essentially a lot of information, I want to talk more about the brain science around stigmatization. I wanted to talk about the imprecision of labels and how diagnostic criteria has changed over time, and all that had to go, and I had to really make it succinct and tie it to my story and some very specific, easy to understand examples.
I think with these branded talks, TEDx, Q Ideas, Idea City, these short form, idea centric talks, I think that's the new way forward. You have to connect first. People don't care how much we know until we know that we care enough to make it simple and accessible for everybody outside of the silo that we're in. So powerful
Absolutely.
stuff. Final question, Adi. What was the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or right before your talk?
So, if I have to say the most, then I talk about it in the talk. It wasn't intended. It was ad-libbed because I struggle with ADHD and I wasn't ready for the talk when they needed me. So I went downstairs to practice because I was obsessive about practicing. So I went downstairs to a little room to practice, and they were running around like crazy looking for me. And so I put on the mic 10 to 15 seconds before I was supposed to go up. Whereas normally they want you to have like a 5 to 10 minute lead time. But they ran me into that room, put the mic on me, and then I walked on stage immediately. And I mentioned that when I mentioned my ADHD in the middle of the talk. And as a point, so it worked out perfectly because people think that when I say I have ADHD, it's a fun little, thing to kind of throw in a party, but it makes me miss things and almost miss things without help. And so that was an incredible example of that happening. And the guy who walks up after the MC of the event, who walks up after, talks about it too. And he says, you guys think he was joking, but I was asking his mom where he was until about 30 seconds before the talk. So that was unexpected, but it somehow weirdly worked. It just worked into the talk.
All right, Talk Universe, we've been enjoying this blitz round with Adi Jaffe. Don't do that at home, folks. Find the green room. Don't do that to your organizers. Don't do that to the coordinating team. If we've learned one or two things, we've learned a lot of things. So you can find out more about Adi's talk, Rebranding Our Shame, at our show notes page at BeTheTalk.com. We will have a link right there. You can watch this talk. 500,000 people have already. You should too. You should also go to his website, adijaffe.com, ADIJAFFE, adijaffe.com. Find out the amazing work that Adi is doing with other people. He has rehabilitated many, many, many people, and he is making this world a better place. We'll be back in just a moment with Adi in the final word of advice. Everyone wants to change the world, but not everyone knows the first step. Before you can change the world with your talk, it has to be selected. So grab the templates, timelines, and tools that I use to get my talk selected at BeTheTalk.com. And it's time for the 10-second final word of advice for Talk Universe.
All right. So I have a new book. We talked about this right before. I'm not good at presenting this early on enough, but I am big, as the talk suggests. This book is called The Abstinence Myth. I'm big on not necessarily buying into the status quo, whatever struggle it is you're experiencing. So we have grown so accustomed to just believing that the most common way of addressing any of the problems we struggle with is the only way. And in addiction, I think this is particularly true. I deal with a lot of families and individuals who've been struggling, been to multiple rehab attempts, have been, trying to address this issue for decades sometimes. My biggest word of advice is, whether you're somebody preparing to kind of rebrand yourself, give a talk or something like that, is look outside the box. Look for solutions. Look for options that haven't been explored often, that you don't hear about a lot. And the main reason is, especially in the world that we're inundated, the amount of information we're inundated with in this world, the most common approaches are normally the ones that catch your eye first. And so, whether it's an incredible and unique presentation technique, or again, if something you're actually struggling with your everyday life and the the kind of run of the mill, well trudged road is not working for you, look for other options. I don't believe in failure. I think failure is what happens when you don't get up after ending up getting a result you don't want to get. I've given now multiple TED Talks, 2 TED Talks, and many other keynotes and things like that. You're going to learn from every experience you give. Life is all about moving forward and learning from your experiences. And that's my biggest advice.
Adi Jaffe, thank you so much for coming on the talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to Be the Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.